Welcome to Echoes of the Past, where history isn't just old, it's oddly fascinating.
From forgotten facts to bizarre backstories, we dig into the dusty corners of time
So you don't have to. I'm Jody Lynn, your amateur historian and full-time trivia hoarder.
And I'm Ephraim, here for the facts and the fun.
So let's rewind the clock and press play on the past. Before we begin today's episode, we want to take a moment to explain exactly what we're doing here and maybe just as importantly, what we are not doing. Religion and spirituality are some of the most meaningful parts of human culture. For billions of people around the world, belief systems shape identity, morality, family traditions, and the way they understand the universe. Because of that, this episode is not about proving or disproving any religion, nor is it about ranking belief systems or deciding which ones are right or wrong. Instead, what we are doing today is something a little different. We're stepping back and asking a historical question. When did spiritual thinking first appear in human history, and how did it evolve into the religions we see around the world today? To answer that question, we're relying on archaeology, anthropology, and historical records. These fields don't attempt to define faith itself. What they do instead is look at evidence like burials, ritual spaces, art, temples, and written texts, and then ask what those things might reveal about how humans understand life, death, and the unseen. And what researchers have discovered is actually pretty fascinating. Long before written history, before cities, and before agriculture, and even before permanent settlements, human beings were already performing rituals and treating death in ways that suggest they were asking spiritual questions. In other words, the search for meaning may be one of the oldest human behaviors we have. So tonight, we're going to travel back through tens of thousands of years of human history. We'll look at the earliest possible evidence of spiritual thought, the first known ritual sites ever discovered, how belief systems formed around the world, and how many of the major religions people know today grew out of ancient traditions. Along the way, we'll also touch on a few strange and eerie discoveries that archaeologists have made, sites and artifacts that hint at rituals whose meanings we may never fully understand. Because when you start digging into the history of spirituality, you quickly realize something. Humanity has always been trying to answer the same questions. Where did we come from? What happens after we die? And is there something beyond the world we can see?
The first challenge historians run into when studying religion is that the belief itself doesn't fossilize. You can't dig up a skeleton and immediately know what that person believed about the universe. Instead, archaeologists look for patterns of behavior that suggest symbolic thinking. One of the clearest clues come from how early humans treated their dead. Some of the oldest burials ever discovered date back roughly 100,000 years, long before written language existed. At several sites in the Middle East, human remains were found intentionally placed in shallow graves. These bodies weren't discarded or abandoned. They were carefully positioned and sometimes surrounded by objects or colored pigments. At one burial site in Israel, researchers discovered a skeleton that had been covered in red ochre, a natural pigment often associated with blood or life. The presence of the pigment wasn't accidental, it had been deliberately applied. The meaning behind this is still debated, but many archaeologists interpret it as a possible ritual connected to death and rebirth. And here's where the eerie part begins. If that interpretation is correct, it means human beings may have been performing symbolic funerary rites or rituals 100,000 years ago, at the time when our ancestors were still living as nomadic hunter-gatherers surrounded by ice age landscapes and megafauna. In other words, the first sparks of spiritual thinking may be almost as old as modern humanity itself. Even more intriguing is the possibility that Neanderthals may have shared similar behaviors. At a cave site in Iraq known as Shanidar Cave, scientists discovered Neanderthal skeletons surrounded by pollen particles from flowers. Some researchers believe that the body may have been buried with a bouquet placed beside it. Not all archaeologists agree with that interpretation, but if it's correct, it would mean other human species entirely might have practiced some form of burial ritual. The idea that Neanderthals, who disappeared roughly 40,000 years ago, may have had symbolic traditions of their own raises a haunting possibility. Spiritual curiosity might not be uniquely human.
For many years, historians assumed that organized religion developed after agriculture and permanent settlements. The theory was simple. Once people started living in villages, they built temples. But in the 1990s, a discovery in southeastern Turkey completely flipped that assumption upside down. Archaeologists uncovered an ancient complex known as Göbekli Tepe, and it immediately became one of the most puzzling archaeological sites ever found. The site dates back to around 9600 BCE, making it over 11,000 years old. To put that into perspective, Göbekli Tepe was already ancient before the pyramids of Egypt were even a distant idea. What makes the site so extraordinary is its scale. Massive T-shaped limestone pillars, some weighing up to 20 tons, are arranged in circular enclosures. The pillars are covered with detailed images of animals: snakes, foxes, boars, birds of prey, and insects. What the site does not contain is just as strange. There are no houses, there are no hearths, there is almost no evidence that people actually lived there. Instead, archaeologists believe that Göbekli Tepe may have been a ritual gathering place, built by communities of hunter-gatherers who traveled there for ceremonies. That means people may have organized large-scale religious activity before they even invented farming. Some scholars now argue that religion may have actually helped drive the development of civilization itself. Large gatherings required food, which may have encouraged the early domestication of crops. In other words, belief systems might have played a role in creating the first societies. And the mysteries surrounding the site don't stop there. At several points in its history, the entire complex appears to have been deliberately buried by the people who built it, covering the structures under tons of earth and rubble for reasons we still don't fully understand. It remained hidden until the late 20th century. For over 10,000 years, one of humanity's earliest ritual sites simply disappeared beneath the ground.
As human societies grew more complex, spiritual traditions evolved alongside them. Different cultures developed different ways of interpreting the world around them, but many early belief systems shared similar themes. Ancient traditions often focused on nature spirits, ancestors, and unseen forces connected to the environment. Many anthropologists use the term animism to describe these early systems. Animistic traditions view elements of nature, rivers, mountains, animals, storms as having spiritual presence or consciousness. You can see versions of this worldview in ancient traditions across Africa, Asia, and the Americas and Oceania. From there, more structured mythologies began to form. Ancient Mesopotamia, some of the earliest recorded religious stories emerged alongside the first writing systems. The people of Sumer described a universe governed by powerful deities associated with natural forces and celestial bodies. Temples were built, priesthoods developed, and rituals became increasingly formalized. Meanwhile, in Egypt, religion became deeply intertwined with kingship and the afterlife. Egyptian belief systems included elaborate funerary traditions, tombs filled with symbolic objects, and detailed descriptions of the journey of the soul would take after death. What makes Egyptian spirituality especially fascinating and a little eerie is how seriously they took preparation for the afterlife. Entire archaeological projects were devoted to preserving bodies and guiding souls through the next world. The pyramids themselves were not simply monuments, they were spiritual machines designed to assist the dead in reaching eternity.
Thanks for flashbombing me.
I did not mean to.
Over thousands of years, belief systems continued to evolve, merge, and branch outward as cultures interacted. In South Asia, early spiritual traditions developed into what scholars call the Vedic religion, which eventually influenced the formation of Hinduism. Hindu traditions contain some of the oldest continuously practiced spiritual ideas on Earth, including concepts like karma, reincarnation, and cosmic cycles of creation and destruction. Around the 6th century BCE, philosophical movements emerged. Dee Dee had some thoughts.
Clearly.
Emerged that would become Buddhism and Jainism?
I have no clue how you say that.
I don't think I've heard of that one. In China, spiritual traditions developed that emphasized harmony, balance, and moral philosophy. These traditions would eventually become Taoism, and Confucianism. It's a whole lot of letters. Meanwhile, in the Middle East, religious traditions centered around a single divine creator gradually took shape. These traditions eventually gave rise to Judaism, which later influenced both Christianity and Islam. These three religions share many historical roots, sacred texts, and prophets, which is why they are often described as the Abrahamic religions. Today,